Hello, and welcome to Confessions of a Successful Leader, hosted by me, Andrew Tallents, the self-coaching expert. In each episode of the show, we hear the insightful confessions of a successful leader who wants to inspire others to live their professional and personal dreams. I am always keen to hear your feedback, particularly in relation to the kinds of leaders you would like me to invite onto the show in future. But for now, sit back, relax, and enjoy the rich insights from our special guest. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Confessions of a Successful Leader, hosted by me, Andrew Tallents, the self-coaching expert. I'm delighted that Stanley Lewis has joined me in the studio today. Welcome, Stanley.
Good morning, Andrew. Thank you. I'm really glad to be here with you today.
Yeah, looking forward to hearing your story. As all our audience will know, we always start just by getting to know our special guest. So, Stanley, tell us a little bit about yourself and where your current focus is.
Sure. I'm Stanley Lewis. I am founder and Chief Executive Officer of A28 Therapeutics. We are a clinical stage biotechnology company developing a targeted lytic peptide platform for treating cancer. That's a whole mouthful, and I apologize for all that. I'm also an internist, internal medicine physician. I trained at the University of Texas quite a while ago, and I did my internship, residency, and fellowship there, and then joined the faculty of the university for a while. I was recruited into biotech to actually develop a drug for treatment of HIV disease, and that was an interesting journey because after leaving the safe confines of academia to join the topsy-turvy world of biotech, my company was acquired by another biotech company, and they didn't want to go into the HIV therapeutic area. So I was about to be without a job, but they asked me to help them out-license the product because they thought it was promising. So I did, to another biotech company, and that company decided to hire me as their chief medical officer. I stayed there for about 10 years, but we finally got that drug approved for treatment of drug-resistant HIV disease. Then it was about that time I got a call from my old CEO, the one who had recruited me from the university. She asked me to come out to California to help her develop a new drug in her new company. So I did. And sure enough, we were developing a drug for treatment of hospitalized influenza when COVID came along and basically cured the flu. So without that avenue to develop our drug, I was asked to help find a new drug for our pipeline. And so I did. But unfortunately, our team was a bit dysfunctional at the leadership level. We couldn't agree on anything. Very smart people, but boy, it was always a struggle. And I was unable to convince this group that this was the right way for us to go. So I ended up leaving the company, acquired the drug that I thought was really cool. And now that's where I am, developing that drug. We're seeking a Series A round of financing so we can get back in the clinic and show the world what I think is going to be a new blueprint for how we treat cancer.
I love that. And thank you for the summary. We're going to be digging deeper into that journey later on. But before we do that, it's very normal for our guests to talk about their professional lives. Yes. So I'm going to ask you a follow-up question, Stanley. When you're not working very hard in what you do, what is it you do outside of work?
Wow. I am a dad and a husband first and foremost, and probably shouldn't say it in that order. My wife would kill me. I'm a husband and a dad. I am very fortunate to have sort of married my college sweetheart. We've been together for more years than I should say on this call. And I have two delightful teenagers. You don't usually use the word delightful and teenagers in the same sentence. And on some days I shouldn't either, but at least today I can. They were both in a great mood when they left for school this morning, and that's it. Boy, if that doesn't keep you busy, you're probably not doing it quite right.
Absolutely. And then outside of the family, because we all need to do this as leaders and CEOs, when you need the me time, the time where you need to just recharge or whatever it is you need to do, what's your space? What do you enjoy doing?
I really enjoy mindless TV. Right? Not the news, not the shows that sort of get you engaged, but sort of something you can just sort of veg out to. I like a good book when I can listen to one on Audible. I'm dyslexic, so it's difficult for me to read But boy, Audible has just opened my whole world to a whole nother level of being able to engage and escape. And I like warm weather things, right? Beach and sort of going out for a walk or by the beach, or things that you do outside in the sun.
No, I can relate to that. I'm in the UK now. We haven't got too much of that today. So let's go back to the child. I'm interested in dyslexia. It's really interesting. I know Richard Branson speaks openly about this now. Many more entrepreneurs, CEOs I'm working with these days. It's come to them later in life to discover that they are dyslexic, but some people are lucky that they get diagnosed earlier in life. So from your perspective, tell us about your childhood, what it was like growing up, what kind of role models did you have around me, and how did that particular environment shape that early leadership style?
Wow, that's a mouthful. So I grew up in a small town called Lufkin, Texas. It's in East Texas, about a couple hours north of Houston. And it was, late 60s, early 70s, and in America, right? And I'm a Black man. And so there were all of the things that were going on in that sort of transition in life. And I was very fortunate to have two wonderful parents. My dad was a, a very he was a very quiet. He had a sort of quiet strength about him. Didn't say a whole lot, but lived in a life that you could look up to as an example. I've heard it said that you always end up either trying to live up to your parents or trying to live down your parents. And he was certainly someone I was trying to live up to. My mom was we used to call her the executionist. And it had a twofold meaning. She was very organized and very task oriented. So she was executing things very well. And she would also kill you if you screwed up. So there was a disciplinarian a tint to her as well. And that was it was a great trial. It was a great childhood. I had two sisters. I was the middle child and I was the only boy. So I kind of got doted on because I was the son. And we live in a world that tends to do that, to praise their boys. And I was a good student. I worked hard in school. I tried to do my best. I can remember, if you've got a second for a little story.
Sure. Yeah.
My dad, I came to him as a kid of maybe 6 or 7. And I told him, like all kids at 6 or 7, that I wanted to be a policeman when I grew up. And he said, "Yeah, son, that's great. Good job, policeman." And I went away, and maybe a year or two later, I came back to him and said, "No, Dad, I changed my mind. I don't want to be a policeman anymore. I want to be a fireman." He's like, "Oh, yeah. Well, that's a good job. That's great. Yeah, be a good fireman." And then I came back to him maybe a couple of years later and said, "Dad, I changed my mind. I don't want to be a policeman. I don't want to be a fireman. I want to be a doctor." And he said, "Yes, that's what my son wants to be. He wants to be a doctor." He ran around. He told everyone at the post office where he worked. He told everyone at our church. He told everyone, you see you in the grocery store, "Hey, my son's going to be a doctor." And you know what? I was so, such a parent pleaser that I decided at that moment, something that made him that happy, doggone it, I was going to do it. So that's actually how I ultimately became a physician. I didn't even think about it again because it made him so incredibly happy.
I love that story. So talk to us then about those teenage years, education now, because we all know listening to this, getting into medicine, no matter what kind of education system in it is difficult. It's challenging
Sure.
in terms of the years. So talk to us about those years and how that again started to show. What kind of leader you were becoming as you were leading yourself?
Yeah, so very driven, sort of very focused, very, sort of hard work ethic was taught to me by both of my parents, especially my mother. And that was something that I sort of developed and maintained even through the rebellion of teenage years. And it was not until I got to college, actually, that I started to ask myself, as my world broadened from this sort of small town that I lived in to this university. I was at the University of Texas in Austin. And I started to ask myself, had I really given enough thought to what I wanted to do with my life and why I wanted to do that with my life. And I started to realize, even though I was in biology and chemistry and all the things that help to make you pre-med, I actually liked some of the other courses that I took that were more in the humanities and liberal arts areas, and started to wonder, am I really going down the right path? Science is straightforward, but it's a lot. And I don't know that I love it as much as all these other people who I'm in these classes with. There was certainly a sort of rethink that was going on with me during those early adult, late teen, early adult years. And I ultimately ended up going to my mom and asking her. I said, "Mom, I don't know that I really want to do this. And boy, I think it's going to make Dad, it's just going to kill him." She told me, "No, son, your dad doesn't care what you do. He just wants you to be happy. So do you know what you want to do?" And I was like, "No, I don't know. I just never have thought about it. I've just always said I was going to be a doctor and just went with that." And she says, "Well, I tell you what, son, you just go ahead and stay pre-med because maybe that's the course you will ultimately decide you like. But if you, along the way you find something else that you want to do, then sure, just tell us and, we'll change course." That was so liberating just to know that I had the choice belonged to me. I never really thought about it again. I just went straight to medical school. I, worked my way through that, and then sort of just became a doctor. On a sad note, my dad died of gastric cancer when I was a third year medical student, and I went through a time right after that I really started to question, sort of why I was doing what I was doing, because the person who had more than anything wanted me to be a doctor, and so wasn't going to get to see that in this lifetime, human form. But I took that opportunity then to expand my view of what medicine was. Maybe it was more than just the white coat and interacting with the patient and trying to work them through a journey from disease to health. Maybe being a doctor had more facets to it. And that's ultimately where I became interested in public health. That's ultimately where I became interested in drug development. That's an interesting story as well. I was taking care of patients who had HIV disease, and it was difficult because the medicines that we had back in that day were very, very toxic, and patients had a dilemma. They could either take these, sort of toxic medications that I was giving them and live, or they could not take them and die a death from AIDS. And so they took them and they endured what I was putting them through. And I felt bad because I felt like this is not fair. Someone should come up with some new medications that are not so toxic. And then I started to realize that person that I was looking for was me. So going into drug development wasn't a chasing of sort of commercial dreams or prosperity or a different lifestyle or any of that. The reason I went into drug development was to give doctors better tools to fight diseases with. And I was able to do that at my previous company, TimeEd Biologics, when we developed a drug that I still think most physicians and patients will tell you is the most tolerated HIV drug there is. It's a monoclonal antibody, for God's sake. It barely has any side effects at all. And that's exactly what I'm trying to do in the cancer arena, right? I'm trying to bring new medications that are going to address the needs of the patient's safety, tolerability, and their sort of well-being as they face a disease that is pretty daunting. So I'm really, really gratified by what I do.
Now, I might be wrong here, but to correct me. So what I'm getting a sense of in terms of particularly those early years where you'd made that decision, that was going to be where you were going to focus your expertise. It was you that was going to move into that area. What was, I guess, the challenge for you from the perspective of there's a lot of ambiguity, there's a lot of unknowns, there's a lot of failure in terms of trying things and then not working, etc. How did you feel about that prospect in that sense, knowing that was going to be ahead for you?
I sort of just kept my eye on what I consider my North Star, right? My sort of guiding principles, the value system that I have. And it really started with, how seriously I took the Hippocratic Oath. First, do no harm. So I said, if I'm going to go down this path of drug development, I am not going to develop drugs that cause bad side effects. I'm just not going to do it. I don't think that's my purpose. I won't get any joy and satisfaction out of producing a drug that causes 50% of patients to have, intractable nausea and vomit. I just can't do it. So that was one. In that realm of sort of uncertainty, I knew that that's what I wanted to do. That was unshakable. I knew something else too. I believed that drug development had become too cool for school. And I believe that we should look back at nature for clues as to how we need to fight disease. I think that the answers are there if you look for them, and that studying physiology is going to give you clues about how to address pathophysiology. And I felt like we were probably sort of missing that input from nature and going more in a direction that I think is more complex. And I think that's really the third thing is complexity. We sort of worship complexity in our industry. And I'm a simple guy from rural East Texas. I like to keep it simple, stupid, the KISS principle. So I knew that if I was going to be developing any kind of therapy for patients, I should be able to explain it to them in simple layman's terms. Look, it does this, 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 and this is how it does it. And they should be able to understand that. If it gets too complex or too complicated, it's not the drug that I need to develop. So I felt that if I could find a way to stay in that lane, then I would be able to not burn out and become satisfied and ultimately successful in this unknown world of drug development.
And I'm fascinated now in terms of the next point, and I'm not sure what age this would be for you, so help me, but bear in mind you're so focused back then in terms of the purpose and the mission, and it has to be you to do this, and it's very clear what it is that you're going to be doing. And yet to make this happen, you would have had to collaborate and also lead other people who didn't necessarily have exactly the same purpose and reasoning to do this for you. So talk to us about that transition where to make it happen, you needed to lead and manage other people in that direction. Talk to us about
that. My need to lead was sort of thrust upon me, even in elementary school. I was always the kid that was president of the class or student council or honor society. Whenever there was a vote, I didn't even have to run sometimes. It was something that was sort of inherent in me. I didn't know sort of where it came from. I've tried to dissect it and sort of, deconstruct it and to see where that sort of comes from. And I think it's a whole lot of things, as it probably is with all folks who find themselves having a strength of leadership. The main thing I do is listen. The main thing I do is I sort of lead with compassion. And I'm very, very in tune to sort of what other people are going through. Every single one of us has a trauma. And it may be a trauma that if you told it to someone else, they might not consider it trauma. They may have been able to handle that so much better than perhaps you did or think they could. But your story is your authentic story. And it was the trauma, for you. It was the challenge for you. It was the hurdle that you had to get over. And I just recognize that everyone has those. I have them and they have them. So sometimes the way they present, the way they show up, how much effort they put in is informed by how they've handled, their journey in life and what sort of things cause them to stumble. And if I can tap into that feeling in me that is compassionate, and I can present myself vulnerable and as a relatively open book, not fully transparent, of course, but a relatively open book to those that I'm around, they tend to want me to be their leader. And then whether I was seeking the spot or not, I became I became that consciousness of our group. And that was true, like I said, in school growing up. That's been true in every company where I've worked. Up, down, doesn't matter if I'm leading folks that are subordinate or if I'm managing up, as they say. I've always been able to win the respect of my colleagues because I believe I lead with that compassion and I listen to their stories.
And that's really interesting. And we may go on to talk about this. I agree with you, by the way, in terms of we all have trauma, and some of it isn't necessarily what we experience. Some of it could be intergenerational, for example,
Yeah.
which we may come to later, which is linked to disease as well. But from your perspective, I really love this thing about your vulnerability and this listening and your openness in that sense. So when others are actually around you and this is happening, what do they learn about you in terms of the trauma that you suffered, the trauma you were dealing with?
I oftentimes tell the stories that I think were that shaped me. You may consider them trauma. I may consider them just my stories. But, I mentioned my dad was a quiet sort of leader and inspired me in so many ways because of who he was. But he was, he he did some things that I probably wouldn't do now as a parent, right? You look and you learn and you say, okay, that doesn't work for me. This I can take away. It does work for me. And I was a smart kid. I made good grades. And I worked really hard for that because at the time I didn't know I was dyslexic. And so I just learned to put my head down and really work, as no one was going to outwork me. And that's just was my attitude toward all things academia. And my dad I'd come home with my sort of grades on my report card. And of course they were all A's, but he'd look and he'd find the one where I'd done the worst. Maybe it was a 93, right? But what's up with this? Why aren't you, what are you not understanding in this course? What is there some way we can help you to do better? And I'm sitting here like, Dad, you do know that's an A, right? You do know that's actually the highest grade in the class, right? And it always made me feel like he wasn't proud of me, and like he always wanted more. I don't know that that's what he was thinking. I don't know if that was his intent, but it left me, it sort of left me thinking I was never enough. I was never enough, and I will tell folks that story, and maybe that informs you a little bit about from where I come from. And I'm at risk of modeling that behavior for not only the folks at my work where I lead, but also for my children. So I'm very conscious of that. My wife reminds me of that if she sees me slipping into any of those patterns where you don't remind people that you are very proud of them and that they are enough. I'm the father of a autistic son, and he is just, he's just the greatest kid you ever want to meet. And that's not to say that his sister is not equally wonderful. And if she ever hears this podcast, she will make sure that I need to make sure I say that too. Sure. But just since I'm sort of referring to him, he didn't talk until he was almost 4 years old. He was nonverbal. And I can remember one time with a friend who had come to town and was a high school friend, someone I hadn't even seen in a long, long time. And we went and shared a beverage. And in that moment, I just started telling him about, I got my son and he doesn't talk, and, giving this story of, I got something I didn't expect. And he said to me in just a really, really sort of blunt way, he says, well, Stan, maybe he just didn't want to talk to you. And I thought, you a-hole. What do you mean? I'm sitting here pouring my guts out to someone that I hadn't known, I had been really close friends with in a while, and I was almost a stranger in that regard. And then you say that. I went home, I told my wife, can you believe this guy? Right? And she was like, yeah, well, maybe that's why you guys aren't friends, right? That's maybe why you don't see each other but every 30 years, right? But then I started to think about what he was saying. Here I am, my son's father, the man who's supposed to love him more than anything else in the world. But as a physician, I was running around trying to get him to this doctor and that doctor, and this therapist and that therapist, trying to see if we could get him to talk, get him to progress and engage the world in meaningful ways, at least meaningful and tangible to us. I don't know if I would like me either. I might not talk to me either, because what all that earnest behavior was perhaps saying to him was that you're not good enough, and that you're not what I want. And that was the farthest thing from the truth. So as soon as I had that sort of revelation, maybe he's just doesn't want to talk to you, I switched. I reinvented myself as a father. And I don't know if it's coincident or not, but a few months later, he started talking. And now he won't shut up, right? I can't get him to be quiet now. But it's sort of wonderful and tell that story, because it's such a central part of my journey in my life, it's sort of inflection point for me. But it also informs what I do as a leader, is to always try to sort of check myself and ask that introspective question, Stanley, what are you doing? What is it that you're bringing to the table that's creating a situation that may not be optimal for the team's performance and optimal for our experience? I always tell the folks I work with, work should be fun. If you're coming to work and it's not fun, then we're doing something wrong and we need to figure out what that is. I'm not saying you need to come to work rather than be at home. All right. I don't want it to be that fun, but I do want you to come to work with a smile on your face, that you're going to be around people that care about a common goal and that we're working together and that we work through whatever strife or conflicts that we may have internally, because we do put that goal as our common sort of North Star. And for me, stories like, sort of how my son ultimately became verbal are stories that I think resonate when I tell my team, and it creates a bond and it creates a closeness, and it sort of reveals in many ways sort of who I am and where I am on this journey.
Thank you. We've got time for a couple more questions. And the first one that comes to mind links into what you've said there, because what I love about what you said, and this happens all the time, we get this feedback or somebody says something, we get that immediate knee-jerk defensive reaction that's more about us than it is them. And yet there's a gift in it, which you found.
Yes.
So let's keep on that theme. If you look at your career, it doesn't matter where it was, what's the thing with hindsight that actually it was probably a really big setback for you, either personally or professionally at the time, and you couldn't see beyond it, and yet later in life you can see what the gift was?
I think I'm in that moment right now. As I told the story of my most recent employment and then my founding of this company, had the company I was working with succumbed to my way of thinking, we would have in-licensed that product, and we would have been on our road to developing it. And I would have been the chief medical officer of that biotech company. But instead, they said no, and it hurt me. And I felt like that was really my decision to make, and no one was listening. And in that moment, I found the courage to leave that environment, leave that, sort of to face what it was that I really ultimately wanted to do. Have an influence over that process in an unprecedented way in my life up until that point, which is to found a company and to be its leader and to nurse it up the way I think pharma companies should be, and guided by principles that I glean from my physician background and my compassion and all the aspects of my development, bring that to, sort of bring that personality to this process. It's been so cool, but it would have never happened had I not, had we been successful in convincing the other company to take this drug. So thank you for saying no.
No, I love that. And what you're also demonstrating here, I think it was also, again, Richard Branson, we mentioned him earlier, but he talks a lot in his blogs around the fact that he believes that many people in businesses, no matter what the industry is, are entrepreneurs.
Mm-hmm.
They have the ability at some point in the future to follow their dreams, follow their passions, follow their purpose in life, and actually go either alone or with other people, founding a business, joint fund, to live really what it is they're here to do. So we're both doing that now. I founded my business a few years ago. So if we actually finish off with this question for you, Stanley, bear in mind you've made the plunge and you've made that courageous leap. What kind of legacy do you want to leave behind in terms of the business you founded now and what you're here to do? So let's finish with that.
Wow. I want to do two things for sure, perhaps a couple others. But as these are the prominent things that sort of come to my mind, is I want people to look back and say he led with integrity, that he was his authentic self, that he, didn't mind, telling about his failures and his stumbles, as well as those successes, and that made him real, and that made him win. One of the things that I want to leave on the sort of an imprint beyond just me as a leader is sort of the products that I've helped to produce. Those products being my two children to some degree, but also the commercial products that we hope to develop. I want folks to look back and say, he brought diversity to our industry, and that was a good thing. It allowed us to look at things through a different, perhaps dyslexic lens. And from there, we learned new things and new avenues that we could explore, created blueprints for how we can really impact human disease. So, yeah, I have some really big ideas about how we can be better as a people and how we can interact and intervene in making ourselves better, both physically and mentally in our journeys. So I hope that answers the question.
It does. And with that in mind, because I know how important this is when I founded my business, you're still going to be collaborating a lot. There's going to be various investment rounds going forward, various partners. So if people are listening to this today or watching this on YouTube and they've really resonated with you as an authentic leader and what you're trying to do, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you, Stanley?
Yes. Oh, you can reach me by email. It's stanley.lewis@a28therapeutics.com.
Excellent. And you're on LinkedIn as well, because I know I found you on there as well.
Yes, indeed. You can find me on LinkedIn as well.
Super. Well, Stanley, I've loved hearing your story right from those younger years, the relationship with your father, moving into medicine, and then now being in control of your own future about how you make a difference in the world on your terms. So thank you once again for being on the show today.
Thank you, Andrew. It's been my pleasure.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Confessions of a Successful Leader. You can access all previous episodes of the show at confessionsofaSuccessfulLeader.com. If you are interested in finding out more about conscious leadership and self-coaching, just type in Andrew Tallents into LinkedIn or your favorite browser, and you'll find my contact details and all the content that you need. Until next time, don't forget to stay present, curious, and above all, conscious.